She bought it for the peace and quiet, just a $300 shed on the edge of a forgotten Texas highway. Jolene Hart thought it would be the perfect place to fix things in silence, far from the noise of everything she'd lost. But when her boot crashed through the floorboards, and a hidden tunnel revealed itself beneath the dust, she realized this wasn't just a fixer-upper. It was the doorway to a buried legacy, and a fortune that had waited decades to be found. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too, and if tales of second chances and buried treasures inspire you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode takes it even further. Let's get started. The shed sat like a forgotten punctuation mark at the end of a gravel road, just past the last gas station and well before the county line. Jolene Hart parked her dusty truck beside it, engine ticking in the heat, and stepped out with a clipboard in one hand and a thermos in the other. The summer air was thick, cicadas screaming from somewhere in the dry brush, and the smell of rust and sun-baked wood clung to everything. The shed was smaller than she'd remembered from the online listing, slouched slightly to the left like it was tired of standing. But Jolene didn't flinch. She'd seen worse. Fixed worse, too. A lean woman, with grease-stained hands and eyes, a little too old for her 32 years. Jolene wasn't the type to scare easy. She had come to West Decker County not for a fresh start, she didn't believe in those, but for a clean break. Her divorce had finalized 4 months ago. Her auto shop in Dallas was gone, sold off to cover debts she didn't remember making. What she did remember was the feeling of her hands going still for the first time in years, not from exhaustion, but from not knowing what to fix next. The land the shed sat on was 3/4 of an acre, mostly dust and dead weeds, sold by a bank that didn't care what happened to it. As is had been stamped across every page of the deed. For Jolene, that meant freedom. The place came with no expectations, no neighbors, and no memories, at least none of hers. Just 4 leaning walls, a tin roof that looked like it would scream in the rain, and a padlock so corroded she had to snap it with bolt cutters just to get inside. She stepped through the doorway. The air was thick with sawdust and the smell of mouse droppings. Sunlight streaked in through holes in the walls like divine fingers, catching on spider webs and motes of dust. The space was bare, except for a rusted-out tool bench, a stack of rotted crates, and a coil of extension cord that had fossilized in place. She walked the perimeter slowly, her boots creaking on warped planks, eyes scanning for potential or at least stability. She wasn't dreaming big, just a place to keep her tools, maybe fix a motorcycle or two, maybe breathe without flinching. But as she crossed the center of the floor, her right boot struck a hollow spot. She paused, shifted her weight, and heard it again, not the solid thunk of wood on dirt, but something emptier. Jolene crouched, ran her fingers over the boards. One of them gave a little under pressure, just enough to make her stomach pull tight. She grabbed a crowbar from the truck and wedged it beneath the board. It popped with a dry snap, revealing a dark cavity beneath narrow, deep, lined with old beams and cobwebs. A tunnel. Jolene stared into the shadow below, heartbeat loud in her ears. She hadn't come looking for anything, but something had found her. The air rising from the hole smelled older than the shed itself, cool, metallic, like damp coins left at the bottom of a well. Jolene leaned over the opening, one hand gripping the edge of the warped plank, the other holding her flashlight. She clicked it on, and a thin beam cut through the dust, illuminating wood beams running like ribs down into the earth. It wasn't just a crawl space. This was deliberate, built. She swept the light along the walls and saw faint markings, scratches, maybe carvings half hidden beneath layers of soot. Her pulse quickened in a way she hadn't felt since her apprenticeship years, the first time she'd cracked open an engine block to find something unexpected inside. She sat back on her heels and took a slow breath. This was supposed to be simple. A $300 shed, a plot of land no one wanted, a place to breathe, not a mystery, not another burden. But staring into that dark square, she felt an old flicker of curiosity. She thought she'd lost somewhere between divorce papers and overdue bills. Curiosity, and something else, a pull she couldn't name. She fetched a pair of work gloves from the truck, wiped her palms on her jeans, and widened the opening, prying up more boards until she had enough room to fit through. Her flashlight beam caught on a ladder of old, nailed-in rungs descending into the tunnel. They were iron, thick with rust, but still holding. Whoever built this hadn't been careless. Jesus, she murmured under her breath. What the hell is this? The shed creaked around her as if answering. She didn't go down yet. Instead, she circled the perimeter, scanning for other signs, trapdoors, loose dirt, anything. The rest of the floor held firm. Only here, in the center, did the boards sag over hollow ground. She crouched again, tracing the edges of the hole with her fingers. No hinges, no latch. Someone had wanted it hidden but not sealed. Jolene's flashlight flickered. She smacked it against her palm. The beam steadied, casting shadows that looked like hands reaching up from below. Her chest tightened. She stood, pacing a slow circle in the dim interior of the shed. The walls felt closer now. Outside, a gust of hot wind rattled the tin roof, and the cicadas fell silent for half a breath. She should call somebody. The bank, the sheriff, anyone. But even as the thought formed, she knew she wouldn't. This was her shed, her land, her find, and if there was something down there worth knowing, she'd be the one to know it. Jolene knelt at the edge again, tightening the strap of her flashlight around her wrist. She leaned into the dark, her voice barely a whisper. "All right," she said. "Let's see what you're hiding." And then she swung her legs over the edge and began to climb down. The air grew colder with each rung. Jolene's boots scraped softly against the tunnel wall as she descended, iron rungs groaning under her weight but holding. The flashlight trembled slightly in her grip, not from fear exactly though that hovered at the edges, but from the sheer unknown of it all. 10 feet down, then 12. Her boots finally touched ground. Packed earth, dry but firm, the scent of clay and time thick around her. She turned in a slow circle, raising her light. The tunnel stretched ahead in both directions, but only one side had beams still intact. The other faded into collapse, fallen wood, cave-ins, time reclaiming space. She took a tentative step forward, her breath shallow, ears sharp for any shift or echo. The wooden supports had aged, but they were solid. Whoever had dug this had cared about keeping it upright. Her beam caught on something ahead, a nail hammered into a beam, and beneath it, a fragment of cloth, faded red, fluttering slightly in the still air. Jolene reached out, fingers grazing the fabric. Cotton, brittle, torn from a shirt, a flag? She couldn't tell. As she moved deeper, her boots disturbed decades of settled dust. It puffed up in tiny clouds, swirling through the flashlight beam like ghosts. Cobwebs hung like drapes between beams. The silence was absolute, not just quiet but sealed, like sound didn't belong here. Her breath felt louder than it should. Still, she kept walking. The tunnel sloped gently downward, and she counted each beam she passed, 12, 13, 14, until the wall on the left side shifted from dirt to stone. Rough-cut limestone. Chiseled, not natural. Her light swept across it and landed on something strange. A handprint. Not painted, not carved. Pressed into the rock when the mortar was still wet. A large hand, wide-palmed, with fingers spread like someone marking territory or leaving a sign behind. Jolene stared at it, the tunnel suddenly feeling narrower. "Grandpa," she muttered. The word escaped before she even realized she was thinking of him. She hadn't said his name out loud in years, had barely thought of him, since she was a girl chasing fireflies in overalls too big for her. But something about this place, the handprint, the cloth, the construction, it all felt deliberate, familiar even. She couldn't explain it, not yet, but it curled in her gut-like instinct. Ahead, the tunnel widened into a crude chamber. Her light revealed crates, old, dust-covered, stacked and sagging. Some had burst open, spilling rusted tools, metal scraps, things she couldn't identify. But near the back, half buried in rubble and rock, sat something impossible. A vault. Not a safe. Not a box. A full steel door embedded into the limestone wall. Hinges like ship parts, a wheel lock in the center. It looked like it belonged to a submarine, not a shed. Jolene's breath caught. She approached slowly, heart pounding. What in God's name was this place? Jolene stared at the vault door like it might blink. The metal was mottled with rust and age, but it hadn't collapsed like the crates or rotted like the wood. It had endured. Even the massive wheel in the center still held shape, its spokes worn smooth, like fingers had gripped them often, maybe even recently. She stepped closer, flashlight angled low, and ran her gloved hand along the edge. It was cold to the touch. Too cold for the air around it. The feeling raised goosebumps across her neck. A safe this size didn't belong under a shed in a forgotten town. It wasn't something someone just put there. It was built, sealed, meant to be hidden. But why? And by who? The stone wall around it had been reinforced with metal bars, rebar, welding seams. Someone had taken care to bury this. Not just protect it from the elements, but from discovery. She knelt and studied the ground around the base. Dust caked in layers. Her beam caught the edges of something buried just to the right, paper, maybe, or leather. She dug with her fingers, careful not to tear it. Slowly, she pulled it free. It was a notebook, black, water-warped, bound with a thin strip of dried string. The cover had no name. Inside, the pages were yellowed, brittle, and stained with time. Most of the writing was smeared or missing, but a few words remained. The 3rd of July 1962. Marked coordinates verified. Entry complete. Secure vault integrity. Jolene blinked. She flipped a few more pages. All of it was technical jargon notes on soil density, tunnel measurements, a list of materials, welding rods, pressure gauges, gas masks. No names, no explanations. Just entries, logged like a checklist by someone who never expected anyone else to read them. She looked back at the vault. The wheel lock had no keypad, no visible combination dial, just the wheel and a recessed slot beneath it, narrow and long. A card slot? A lever key? It didn't match any lock she'd seen. She tried turning the wheel, but it refused to budge, locked tight. Frustration rose in her chest, but so did something else. An ache in her hands she hadn't felt in months. Not pain, purpose. The kind of ache that told her this wasn't a dead end. It was the start of something that wanted to be found. She sat back on her heels and looked around the chamber. More crates lined the walls. Some had toppled. One had spilled open a metal case filled with old tools, most of them rusted beyond recognition. But one caught her eye. A welding mask. It had initials etched along the rim. C.H., her grandfather's initials. Jolene's mouth went dry. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. He'd been here, not just in spirit, in steel. And now, decades later, his granddaughter was sitting in the same dark silence, holding his forgotten tools. The vault stood between them like a challenge, like a door begging to be opened. Jolene held the welding mask in both hands, like it might dissolve if she gripped it too hard. The initials, C.H., were unmistakable. Her grandfather, Clayton Hart, had died when she was 9. Her memories of him were few, scattered across hot summers and the smell of grease. He used to let her sit on the hood of his truck while he welded, his hands steady, his voice low and certain. But no one had ever mentioned tunnels. No one had ever mentioned this place. She stood slowly, the mask still in her hands, and let her flashlight sweep across the other crates. Most had collapsed, eaten by moisture and rot, but a few looked intact. She moved toward the largest one, pried it open with a rusted crowbar she found on the floor. Inside, wrapped in oil-stained canvas, were blueprints. Dozens of them, rolled and numbered. She laid them out on the floor, flattening the corners beneath a wrench and a brick. They were detailed, precise. Schematics for structural supports, pressure ventilation, even power lines. At the bottom of the stack, tucked inside a manila envelope, was a photo. She pulled it free with shaking fingers. It showed 4 men standing in front of the same vault door she'd just found. One of them was unmistakable Clayton Younger, maybe early 40s, still wearing that same stubborn scowl he always had in the old family photos. But here he looked, proud, confident. Behind him, the other men wore dusty coveralls, government patches sewn into their sleeves. Jolene's stomach turned. Government. That notebook upstairs, the one in the safe, had mentioned coordinates. And here, her grandfather was smiling like he'd helped bury something meant to stay hidden. She flipped the photo over. In faded ink, someone had written, Project Drylight. Site C, July 1962. Final seal. Project Drylight? She grabbed her phone, already low on battery, and typed the phrase into a search bar. No results. She tried Site C and Texas tunnels and even Clayton Hart. Nothing but white noise. If this was a government operation, it had been scrubbed from everything public, buried deep. Jolene looked back at the vault. Her grandfather hadn't just stumbled onto this. He'd been part of it, whatever it was. And if that notebook, those plans, and that photo were right, this tunnel wasn't just some abandoned oddity. It was intentional, maybe even protected. She knelt again and placed the welding mask gently beside the blueprints, like laying down an offering. Her breath came slower now, steadier, her mind starting to stitch the pieces together. This wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was blood. Family. Her grandfather had left no will, no stories, no explanation, just a few tools in the attic of a house long sold. And now, a vault, a tunnel, a trace of something forgotten, waiting underground like a sleeping engine. Jolene stood, brushing dust from her jeans, and whispered aloud to the silence. You were trying to tell me something, weren't you? Jolene didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. She sat on the tailgate of her truck beneath a sky pinpricked with stars, the welding mask beside her, and the photo resting on her lap. The desert around her was silent, except for the soft rasp of wind through brittle weeds. Every so often, she glanced at the shed, its door now propped open, the darkness inside, somehow heavier than before. It didn't feel like an empty space anymore. It felt like it was holding its breath. At sunrise, she went back down into the tunnel. The flashlight beam flickered again, its battery nearly gone, but her hands knew the path now. She stepped over the blueprints and crates and knelt beside the same vault. The notebook still lay open where she'd left it, but something had shifted beneath it overnight. A corner of the floor was raised slightly, as if the stone had been disturbed. She moved the notebook and brushed away the dust. There was a shallow groove cut into the stone, a hidden compartment she hadn't seen before. She wedged her fingers into the seam and pried it open. Inside lay 3 items. The first was a small cloth pouch, tied tight with twine. She loosened the knot and let the contents spill into her palm. A tarnished silver medal on a broken chain. Street Barbara, the patron saint of miners. The edges were worn smooth, the image almost faded, but Jolene recognized the symbol from stories her grandfather used to tell about men who worked the deep shafts, how they carried her image like a shield. The second item was a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it revealed a hand-drawn map, dense with notes, topographical lines, and a red X marked dead center beneath the shed. It wasn't just a tunnel, it was an entrance. The map showed a network branching out beneath the land, marked with numbers, arrows, and a stamp she didn't recognize. September of Interior. Restricted access. She stared at it, heart pounding. If this map was real, and everything so far told her it was, then this tunnel was just the beginning. The third item was a letter. A single sheet, yellowed and brittle. It was addressed to C. Hart. Eyes only. She unfolded it slowly, scanning the tight, typewritten lines. The mineral readings beneath Site C exceed original estimates. Given the vein's purity and projected yield, further excavation will remain off record. All materials and operations to proceed without civilian knowledge. Hart, your welding is critical to containment protocol. No leaks, no visitors. If contact is made, follow discretionary clause 11B. Jolene read the line twice. Then a third time. Her grandfather hadn't just helped build the vault. He'd helped bury something valuable, dangerous, or both. She sat back on the stone floor, the metal dangling from her fingers, the map spread across her knees. If what this letter implied was true, then her $300 shed sat on top of something the government had once tried to keep hidden, and they had trusted Clayton Hart to seal it tight. Jolene couldn't stop staring at the map. Her flashlight's dying beam made the ink look almost alive, pulsing along the hand-drawn lines like veins beneath the earth. The X sat squarely beneath her shed, but what struck her more were the branching arms tunnels that curved like circuits, some ending in shaded boxes marked vent, storage, or simply E. She didn't know what E meant, but one of them, deeper and darker than the rest, was labeled main core. She wasn't sure what terrified her more, the word core or how her hands were already moving to follow it. She packed up everything, the metal, the map, the letter, and made her way out of the tunnel just as the flashlight gave its last breath. Above ground, the heat had begun to rise, but Jolene hardly noticed. She sat on the shed steps, sweat soaking through her shirt, and pulled out her phone. No signal, no surprise. She needed information, power, and someone smarter than her about these kinds of things. By sunset, she was back with two things: a deep cycle battery she rigged to run floodlights down the shaft, and a manila envelope tucked under her arm. Inside were photocopies of the map and the letter. She didn't know who she was going to show them to yet, but something in her gut told her she'd need them soon. That night, under the buzz of portable work lights, she followed the map's line past the vault. The stone corridor sloped deeper, colder, the air thinning slightly with every step. The beams here were stronger, metal reinforced, and set at perfect intervals. This wasn't a mining shaft. This was something else, something engineered. After 20 minutes of walking, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, easily the size of a basketball court. Jolene stopped in her tracks. Her light swept across the walls, where enormous turbine housings were bolted into concrete, their blades long since frozen by time, but unmistakable in shape. Vents ran upward, vanishing into darkness. Old cables dangled from the ceiling like dead vines. In the center of the room, half buried beneath tarps and metal sheets, sat a machine. It looked like an engine part industrial generator, part aircraft turbine. She stepped closer, dragging the light with her. The side panel was marked MRV Prototype 01, property of Drylight Systems. Drylight, the name from the letter, from the photograph. She ran her fingers along the machine's side. Smooth, seamless, still warm somehow. Not from power, there hadn't been any for decades, but from presence, from memory. She didn't know what MRV stood for, but her gut whispered something like Mineral Recovery Vehicle or Mechanical Reactor Vault. Something big, buried, and dangerous. In the corner, the rock wall glittered faintly. Gold. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but no, embedded in the stone were flecks of bright metal, spread in veins like lightning frozen in quartz. She swallowed hard. She wasn't standing in a tunnel anymore. She was standing in a mine. By morning, the dust on Jolene's boots looked like it had come from another century. She stood at the mouth of the tunnel, staring out across her small plot of land, and realized everything had changed. The world above still looked the same sun-scorched dirt, the leaning tool shed. Her truck parked like a loyal dog beside it, but beneath her feet now ran a web of secrets, veins of gold, and something far older than any blueprint could explain. She thought she could keep it quiet, but silence, like gold, has a weight, and nothing heavy stays buried forever. The first knock came that afternoon. A man in khakis and mirrored sunglasses stood at the fence line, waving politely but not smiling. He introduced himself as Ray Collier, a local land representative. Claimed he was doing a sweep of old plots for a historical reassessment. His tone was syrupy, too smooth. Jolene had met men like him before, men who wore clipboards like weapons and called people miss when they meant problem. "Mind if I walk the boundary?" he asked. I do, actually, Jolene replied, arms folded. This is private land. He didn't argue. Just nodded, smiled like a salesman, and handed her a business card with no phone number, only a logo. Drylight Holdings, LLC. That night, she drove an hour into town, sat in the library until it closed. She searched every record she could find, land deeds, historical sites, geological surveys, but Drylight was a ghost. No company records, no lawsuits, no building permits. But there were whispers, newspaper clippings from the 60 seconds about mineral test zones and military-adjacent construction projects that vanished mid-build. Some families had protested. Some had disappeared. When she got home, her mailbox was open, empty. The next day, another visitor came. This time, it was a man in a suit too nice for this part of Texas. He didn't introduce himself, just stood beside a black SUV and said, "You should consider selling. You're sitting on old claims, and old claims have consequences." Jolene didn't flinch. She walked up to him, handed him the same envelope of documents she had copied the day before the photo, the map, the letter. "You see this?" she said, tapping her grandfather's face in the photo. "That's Clayton Hart. He welded your secrets shut. And now, I'm the one holding the torch." The man didn't blink, just slid the envelope back into her hand like it was contaminated. "We'll be in touch," he said and left. That night, Jolene installed cameras around the shed, bolted the tunnel entrance shut with steel plates. She sat with her shotgun across her lap, and the street, Barbara metal hanging around her neck, worn like armor, not for protection, for memory. Her grandfather hadn't run. He'd sealed this place knowing someone might come looking, and now they had. The mine wasn't just rich with gold, it was laced with ghosts. Some hers, some not, but all of them awake now. Jolene stared at the check on her workbench like it was poison. It had arrived in an unmarked envelope, slid under the shed's door in the middle of the night. No note, no signature. Just the numbers staring up at her. $2,500,000 made out to her name spelled perfectly. Her fingers hovered over it, trembling. That kind of money could change everything. Buy a house, a shop, a life. But it wasn't a gift. It was an eraser, meant to wipe clean the past beneath her land, to bury not just the gold, but the truth with it. She turned it over. On the back, scribbled in careful ink, "All we want is access. You don't have to be involved." Her stomach twisted. They were polite for now. But polite had an expiration date, especially when gold and government shadows were involved. She drove out to the edge of the county and sat beneath the same oak her grandfather used to park under during summer barbecues. She remembered him sitting there, silent, always watching, not fearful, but alert, like he knew something might come back someday, and he wanted to be ready. Jolene pulled out the photo again, her grandfather, the vault, the team of men beside him. She traced his face with her thumb, trying to imagine what he would have done in her boots, but she already knew. He hadn't welded that vault shut because it was dangerous. He'd done it because it meant something, because he believed in protecting it. Maybe not the gold, maybe not even the tech, but the integrity of it all. She drove back to the shed and dug through her old blueprints, her scrap metal, her salvage. She cleared the tunnel, bolted new lights into the chamber, welded new support frames to the walls. Not to hide it, but to preserve it, protect it, tell its story the way she wanted it told. The next morning, she drove to the county recorder's office and filed a historical land designation. It wouldn't stop them, but it would slow them down, give her leverage, a chance to speak before they tried to silence her. That afternoon, local news showed up. Someone had tipped them off. She didn't deny anything. She didn't reveal the gold. She spoke of her grandfather, his work, the vault he helped seal, the heritage buried in the dust of West Decker County. Her voice cracked once, but she didn't look away. "I don't want to sell," she told the reporter. "I want to build. I want people to know." The clip went viral by nightfall. Support emails flooded in, some from strangers, some from veterans who'd known her grandfather's name. A university professor called, offering to help with authentication. A local preservation group drove out and asked how they could assist. She realized then, it wasn't just about guarding the mine. It was about reclaiming something bigger. Not just gold, not just legacy. Her voice, her name, her right to stand her ground. 6 months later, the shed didn't look like a shed anymore. The walls had been reinforced, the roof replaced, and a hand-painted sign now hung above the door. Hartworks, Historical Site, and Machine Museum. Kids came on field trips. Veterans visited just to stand by the vault door in reverent silence. Photographers snapped pictures of the welded beams and engine chamber below, their flashes catching the glint of gold still embedded in the stone walls, like secrets too stubborn to stay hidden. But for Jolene, the heart of it all wasn't the gold. It was the story. It was her grandfather's name now etched into a bronze plaque beside the tunnel entrance, right below hers. Clayton Hart and Jolene Hart. Stewards of legacy. Keepers of the flame. The media called it a discovery site. Historians dubbed it a Cold War relic. Speculators still circled like vultures, but none of them could get past the wall of community that had formed around her. Locals donated fencing, lighting, signage. A retired engineer from Austin helped her diagram the turbine's design for museum documentation. Even the high school shop class pitched in restoring tools, sanding wood, repainting old crates for display. One day, Leo, the shy kid from town who used to loiter by her truck, showed up with his mom and asked if he could help after school. She gave him a wrench and never looked back. She wore her grandfather's welding mask now during tours. Not because she needed it, but because it made her feel closer to him, like they were still building together. In a way, they were. Every once in a while, someone would ask her why she hadn't just taken the money. She'd smile, wipe her hands on a rag and say, "Because you can't put a price on unfinished work. Some things deserve to be completed, not sold." But it wasn't until she stood alone in the tunnel one evening, long after closing time, that it truly sank in. The lights hummed softly above. The air was cool, still carrying that faint scent of stone and iron. She walked to the vault and placed her hand against the cold metal. It didn't feel like a secret anymore. It felt like a story that had finally been spoken aloud. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the Street Barbara medal. It swung gently in the silence, catching the light. "I kept it safe," she whispered. "Like you asked." The shadows around her didn't answer, but they didn't need to. She felt the weight of what had been handed down. Not just the tools, not just the tunnel, but the courage to uncover something and not run from it. As she climbed back to the surface, the sun was dipping low, casting long golden lines across the dirt. The old truck sat waiting, and the shed-turned museum glowed in the light like it belonged there all along. She didn't need to chase fortune. She had built something better. A legacy, a voice, and a future carved not in gold, but in grit.